Welcome to Talent Buzz, where I talk with SaaS companies on how they are doing their talent acquisition. A company called ProfitWell was just sold to Battle for $200 million, and their founder, Patrick Campbell, was the one behind that one. And today, I'm talking with Patrick. We are talking all the learnings regarding their talent acquisition, keeping employees happy, and much more. And I recommend everyone checking out actually their document called We Sign Tomorrow, which is about getting that 200 million euros acquisition. And we start the episode together with Patrick with a little bit weird question. And the question is, does Patrick's dad have a pool yet?
He does not have a pool. So yeah, my dad, he always wanted me, the backstory, because I don't know if everyone knows, but the backstory is my dad always wanted me to be a doctor. And there was some, rock star who his dad always wanted him to be a doctor. And then later in his life, after he made a bunch of money being a rock star, he was swimming, his dad was swimming in his pool. And he was like, you would have made a good doctor, but I think the pool is great. But my dad does not have a pool. So he doesn't, I don't think he wants a pool up in Wisconsin. And it was just a fun story that he always told me. But good question. Good callback. I appreciate that you saw the documentary there.
Yeah, it was good, but I actually have seen it twice. First, I watched it by myself, and then I made my girlfriend, my co-founder, to watch it together with me, because I think there was some great learnings over there. So awesome. Thank you for that. But hey, I've been following your content for a while, and one thing you did lately was kind of this first thought of the day, where you basically put the recording on in first thing in the morning and just share your thoughts. And today we are talking about kind of talent acquisition, people things regarding ProfitWell. How did you do a journey around there? But kind of, what is your first thought that comes to your mind when I say that, hey, talent acquisition? Like, what do you see as talent acquisition?
Yeah. So, the First Thought series was just a series where I wake up pretty early and I would just record the first thing I was thinking about, beyond, I got to go to the bathroom or anything like that. So, I think the first thought when it comes to talent acquisition, my first thought is it is hard for the wrong reasons. I think that a lot of times we end up making we don't process in our businesses how to acquire the right talent, how to keep the right talent, because I think we think it should be easy, but we don't realize the people we're hiring, there's some of them who are captive, they're actively looking for a job. So obviously they're going to come in hopefully through our employee branding and through our, recruiting site and all this other stuff. But there's a lot of this talent, especially for more senior roles, that they're not necessarily looking, or you're only getting really lucky when they're looking. And so you spend a week trying to outreach to people. You can't find anyone. And then you throw up your hands and you're just like, oh, we can't find anybody, that type of a thing. And so I think I don't know if it's truly hard. I think we cracked the code on some things, but not on others. But I think we think it's hard because we don't put it in the work to actually, do it right? Or use products like yours, basically, in order to make it a lot easier. So that's the first thought when it comes to that.
Yeah, I agree on that one. And I remember kind of back in the days when I was doing sales, and then I moved to being a head of sales and kind of scaling my sales team. Suddenly you kind of expect that, hey, now when I'm a head of sales, you know how to recruit people. And I think it is a kind of important skill. And in some places it is kind of underrated. So that's interesting. Do you still remember kind of when you hired your first employee to ProfitWell?
Yeah, it was Peter Zotto, who has been with us. He's been with me the entire time. He's kind of, he's basically the closest thing I have, a co-founder, right? And he came on 9 months later. I started working in the business, and my partner at the time, he lived next to her, and we just met in the hall and briefly. And then there was a snowstorm in Boston, and everyone kind of went to the bar because, that's kind of a tradition in Boston. And that's where we met for the first time, started chatting. This was December probably of that year. And then by January, I think it was cool. He was ready to do something new. I kind of convinced him to come on board. And then April he started, or March or April there he started, and kind of went from there. So yeah, like a lot of classic first hire stories. It's like, well, I kind of knew a guy and asked him to come on board, and he was crazy enough to say yes, basically.
Exactly. I think I've never basically heard a story where there would be a, let's say, founder or two, and then they just would put a job ad open and kind of looking for applicants,
Yeah.
but it's always through some weird
I know a guy,
story,
yeah.
through friends, or something like that.
I think it's also because you don't like. I think it's also because you either think insecurely that you're not going to find somebody because no one's going to take you seriously, so you need to find someone who's a little crazy, or you're right and you're not going to be able to find someone, so you need to find someone a little crazy. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think of, like, if I started a company tomorrow, I probably would, kind of use more of a traditional job posting. But then, like, the path of least resistance is some guy or gal in my network that I'm able to, be like, oh, cool, let's work on this. Right. And, that's either a really good thing or a really bad thing. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. How would you say kind of what has been the biggest difference, kind of course, kind of during the years you started to build kind of your own personal brand and ProfitWell brand as well. And I can kind of assume that has helped a lot in hiring once you kind of got that brand. But when did you kind of really notice that brand helping you kind of with hiring people and kind of getting people on board and really kind of believing in the story?
Yeah. I don't, I think it's when we started doing more video. We were always writing, and the writing was always well received. Like, people are like, oh, this is really good content. This is really deep. This is really helpful. But as soon as we started doing video, I think there's just so many people who they'll share the article, they'll see the article's great, but they won't read the whole thing. But people will, even if the video is just like a summary of the written part, they'll only watch the video, right? Which I think is understandable, because it's easier, quote unquote, to consume, maybe not as easy to retain, but who's counting? And so I think that's when it really helped. And I don't know, I always struggled a little bit with the only reason, like, my personal brand's out there is because I have a debate and speech background. Like, I competed in debate in college and high school. So it's relatively easy for me to kind of, like, there's some people who are terrified to get on a podcast. Like, I looked at your questions beforehand, but I didn't, like, prepare answers, right? I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And it's easy for me to, like, come on here and be at least mildly articulate, right? And so it was easy for me to kind of put stuff out there. But I always struggled with, like, is it too much me versus too much or not enough other people?
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, from a recruiting perspective, it didn't really matter, because a lot of the content we were doing was helpful. It wasn't like, I'm a CEO of a company, look what I'm doing today, look at my calendar. It was very much like, hey, let's talk about this company. This company, looks like their pricing's good here and it needs some work here, which I think that helpful content really, really helped kind of propel us forward. And then you get a brand, and you're all of a sudden, when you're recruiting, even if they kind of came in through a generic, kind of process, like they just filled out an application somewhere, all of that helps when they're in the process. And it's also stuff that our recruiter could send them to be like, oh, here's some interesting information and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I believe personally the power of videos. And I think that is a kind of skill that basically everyone can learn. I still remember the early days. I think it was like 4 years ago when I started first doing videos. I was working as a kind of sales coach during that time. And I went to our studio, shoot a lot of films, and I remember the first time you needed to take like 10 or 15 takes to get that one video going. But nowadays you can basically do it on the first go every time. And actually one person just asked me like how we have been building our company brand now, kind of using videos, and how we can push that much content out. But I really believe that kind of once you master that skill, as you mentioned, it's way easier to join podcasts with kind of only a little of kind of checking out what the questions are and just going there and talking.
Totally.
So it's a great skill to master.
Well, I think it's just one of those things where that's where a lot of media is going. Like, the written word needs to be very high quality now, like the Matt Levines of the world, some of the Substack authors, stuff like that. And I think it's easier to kind of cheat being charismatic on video. Don't worry, there's a lot of people who are really bad at it, and that's okay. But, like, think of some of the podcasts that are out there, like Joe Rogan. Like, it's actually really difficult to talk to someone for 3 hours and make it even mildly entertaining. But it's not like he's doing prep, but he's not doing so much prep and editing like he's writing a blog post, right? And he's obviously done it for a decade, so that obviously helps a lot. But there's a lot of podcasts that get started and they're good just because the content's good, and they're good just because the people are good, and they didn't have to do a lot of effort. They just had to push record and kind of go from there.
Yeah, but what is super interesting, at least for me, like now when we are right now recording this podcast, I think good valuable insight. But I always find out like after the recording, I put stop recording and then we chat for a few minutes. I always find out that kind of 3 minutes being the most valuable. It's kind of weird how that one is happening. But
I think it's just because warming. I don't know. I know this is not like a media podcast, but like it's always. I think it's because there is an air of like, okay, I'm on. I have to, present, and I have to like be articulate. And then sometimes the question you want to ask doesn't get asked because you're like, am I going to offend the person? Because you and I don't know each other that well, right? We know each other from the internet, but we're not like besties. And so we're going to get to know each other in the next whatever minutes. And then you're going to ask the question maybe you didn't want to ask, but that's the question you should ask, at least in my opinion, right? And then I'm also like, maybe I'm not being as real as I could. And then I'm thinking about the thing I talked about in the first 5 minutes. And then when we turn off the record, I'm like, actually that thing I said, like, I actually think that's really dumb, or something like that. So I think it's just, we don't know each other that well. And that's why. So.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, a topic that you've been talking a lot is churn. Mainly where you have been focusing on that topic is kind of customer churn. And actually on SaaS Talk where I attended, you had I would say quite famous speech around churn and repeating that word over and over again. Before hopping into my actual question, like where did the idea came for that? Kind of, were you planning that one for a long time, or was it the kind of idea that you got like one day before the event, or?
No, it was whether we were going to do it or not was like a Friday before the event. Like, I don't know, should we? But the idea came from in our marketing. At the end of the day, you're marketing to people, whether it's trying to recruit someone or you're trying to get someone to get on a sales phone or call or to convert for your product. And I think we miss that a lot of times in employee marketing or just marketing in general. And so what we kind of started doing when we started doing media and video and stuff like that, we kind of took a step back and we were like, everything we're trying to do is very one step away from sales or close, right? So an example would be we did a culture video. Well, that culture video is like very specifically trying to get someone to think, oh, I could work here, right? Like, and so it doesn't really work unless someone's seeking that out. It's not top of the funnel content. It's more like middle of the funnel content. So what we ended up doing is we started saying like, okay, we need just pure top of the funnel content once per quarter. We need like something fun. We're not going to worry how much money it makes us. There's going to be a budget for it. And then the prompt for that one quarter was, what if Mr. Beast, the really famous YouTuber, I just assumed everyone knew Mr. Beast, but I had to clarify that on LinkedIn at one point. So I always point out he's a very famous YouTuber. He's the most famous YouTuber. But long story short, I was like, what if Mr. Beast ran marketing? Like, what would he do? And one of Mr. Beast's early viral videos was he said he counted to 100,000. Like he just recorded a video where he counted to 100,000. And so I was like, well, what if I said the word churn 100,000 times for a video? And so we had done this video. It took 9 hours and like 3 minutes and 20 some seconds, and no bathroom breaks, no stopping, no takes, just recording it the entire time. But long story short, we did that video. It went viral for SaaS. So that means hundreds of thousands of views, not, millions, because that's not the size of our market. But then as we were thinking about, I've given so many talks and I try to do really, really well with my talks. And I think I've gotten to a good place where I'm like, a great speaker for a SaaS conference, which, I'm qualifying that, maybe not a great speaker for a TED Talk, but a great for a SaaS conference. And I was like, let's shake it up. What's something we would do that like, what's the next iteration of a talk? And, you look at a lot of stand-up comedians like that are doing different kind of talks, like Bo Burnham does like an entertaining show, even though it's like a comedy hour. And so we watched some of his specials, and then we were kind of combining things. We were like, well, we're not ready to go like full Bo Burnham because that feels like it's going to be a lot of planning. But like maybe we do this talk on churn where we do slides that very much explain a story and benchmarks, and it's really good content. But then the only word I say is the word churn. And so that's what I did. So I said churn for 20 minutes, and I didn't just repeat it over and over like a mantra. I like kind of like I am Groot from the Guardians of the Galaxy. I just kind of acted like I was talking, but the only word I was saying was churn. So yeah. And the whole point, for those of you who are like, what the hell? The whole point is to get people to that point where they're like, what is happening? WTF, but not to the point where they're like, this is so effing stupid. And I think we towed that line really well, and the content was really, really good in the slides. And so the entire conference and people not even at the conference were talking about the talk and talking about us, which ultimately is the purpose of top of the funnel, branding content. So yeah, that's kind of the story in a nutshell. We have not done something like that for employer branding, but maybe we should.
But then to the kind of actual question regarding churn. So at least for me, you have provided kind of a lot of valuable ideas regarding kind of how to reduce churn within our customers. But then when we are talking about kind of employee churn, like what do you think are the kind of best practices that you can steal from kind of making sure that there isn't customer churn, and you could take those ideas to employee churn?
I think the biggest thing with employee churn, and we got good at this towards the end before the acquisition, but we were not good at this in the beginning, which, obviously we weren't going to be good at this in the beginning, it seems. But what I think was really interesting about us is we found, I think when you're an early manager or an early founder, you have this concept of like, I need to be accommodating, meaning I need to like this type of person, this type of person, this type of person. I need them to like stay at the company. So I'm willing to compromise my values in order to like keep them here. Like a basic example, if you value first principles thinking, right? Or you value, let's do a better one. You value feedback, like you're a feedback culture. Well, someone who's really bad at feedback, either giving it, in many different ways, or is really bad at receiving feedback, if they're good at their job, you might put up with them complaining and questioning, or, really like bringing up how bad they are at feedback or giving feedback. You might put up with that. But and what ends up happening is that's just an unsustainable thing. It's kind of like selling to the wrong customer, right? All of a sudden you're like, well, we'll do this like quick thing. Well, if that thing doesn't align to the long term of what you're building or the culture you're going to create, you're going to get churn. Like that employee is going to leave, and they're going to leave in a way that is not good for anybody. They're going to leave in a way that like they think you're terrible because they think they're right. And it's not that they're right or wrong. It's just that they just don't align to how you're building the company or how you manage, or, a whole host of things. And you're going to be resentful because they're going to quit probably. You're not going to fire them because you're accommodating everything. And you're going to be like, I put up with all of this like commentary and trying to help them like get better at taking feedback, and then they just quit, right? So you're going to be resentful. And like, it's one of those things that could have been avoided. And so what we ended up doing in our interview process, I did all the final interviews, and I would always do like a culture check. And the culture check was like a series of questions. And what we ended up doing was I would just ask questions, and if they responded in a way that, was obviously like they didn't align with how we thought about the world, I would always say like, listen, just so you know, here's how we would handle this. And I'm not saying this is better than what you just described or worse. Like, I don't think it's a better or worse thing. I'm just saying this is how we would handle it. It seems like you wouldn't want it handled that way. And so like, I'm going to let you make a decision because you're an adult, but I'm just letting you know we're handling it this way. So if you do work here, this is how it'll be handled. And if that's a problem, like, I just want you to know now before you take this job, because life's too short, and I want you're probably interviewing elsewhere, and there's probably a better place for you if this is a really important thing. And I think that's just a powerful way to like lower your churn, because all of a sudden you're being very upfront. And also your team, they recognize the things that you're talking about, and you're like not losing team members because of the dissonance. Because when you're like, hey, it's a feedback culture, but so-and-so on the team is always struggling with the feedback. And then, you're like, well, I'm great at feedback. Why is all the attention going to the person that's really difficult with this? Like, then I want to quit because I just don't feel like this environment is, I feel like they're hypocritical, but I also feel like I'm not getting, the benefit of like really living these values. Right. So I think it's just really defining who you are, who you're for, and, not like being homogeneous on all of your values and then being diverse on everything else. Like, cause diversity is super, super important. So I think that's one big thing that a lot of us, especially like if you're a first time founder, like a lot of us miss out on this, or a first time manager. Cause you kind of struggle sometimes as a manager cause you're like, well, like, and you do need to flex because all of your reports are going to be a little bit different. But that doesn't mean you have to, there's a line that you kind of have to follow. And then I think the second thing, and we really struggled with this because we were a bootstrap company, and even if we were a funded company, you have cost constraints. I just think you get what you pay for is something I still really struggle with. Like, we have gotten so many successful young folks who are really early in their career become massively successful and senior very quickly, that it convinced us that we could do that with anybody. And we probably could, but it's going to take years. And sometimes you got to hire that VP or that C-level or that director. And a really great C-level or VP is not cheap. Like, we were like, well, maybe we can get a director of sales for like 120 in the States, 120,000. It's like the only directors of sales you're going to get for 120,000 are not the good ones. And so it's just like really kind of struggling with like, we'd rather have less people, but pay them more. And it's hard because you will always find someone who like turns out to be cheap and good, but you're not going to find a whole team of them. And so you might as well just pay everyone basically more.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And one thing that I've personally noticed kind of regarding the interview and so forth is kind of step-by-step process that I've personally kind of walked through. Like, first, when I started through recruitment, I was taught that you need to be kind of validating the candidates. And that is, of course, kind of super important in a recruitment process. Then basically came the next step, like, hey, actually, nowadays it's hard to find good people. So not that much validating, but actually selling your company. And then I kind of easily found myself overselling. And kind of if you're overselling, then churn will follow. So nowadays, basically between our co-founders, the others are actually doing selling, and then every now and then they come like, hey, Samuel, can you scare the candidates a bit? Like, share very openly the bad shit that is going on in a startup at this stage. And I think that is kind of crucial in order to make sure that people know where they are coming.
Yeah, totally. One thing we did that I think was really helpful too is the more, I don't want to say contentious, but the more contentious values we had or directions, we wrote like memos or essays on them, and some of them were a little bit longer than others. And then we would give them to the candidates, because this is another thing. It's like, you can describe something, but when you have to write something down, you're kind of committing to it and you have to think through it well. And so we would give that to the candidate, and be like, hey, this is what we mean by a feedback culture. Like, and it goes specifically into, answers all the questions and stuff like that. And so that was something that was really helpful as well, as like actually codifying these types of things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But then I would like to go through kind of the biggest success and biggest fuck up regarding on talent acquisition, and maybe start from the kind of biggest success. Like, where do you believe that you succeeded in the best possible way in talent acquisition so far?
Honestly, I think, and I think it's like both sides of the coin. I think I kind of explained this a little bit, but I think the biggest success was 2019, maybe 2020. My business partners and I were talking, and we were just kind of miserable about some of the team members. They were like, it wasn't that they were bad at their jobs. It just was like, there was 3 to 6 hours a week on, I want to call it bullshit, but it wasn't bullshit. It was like 3 to 6 hours a week on like stuff that we didn't value. 3 to 6 hours a week on stuff they valued that we didn't value. And it was kind of like, some of the stuff I talked about, like, really struggling with feedback, really struggling with like this most charitable interpretation value that we had, or have, and like stuff like that. And so what ended up happening is we went to the point where we're like, it's not worth it anymore. Like we looked at the hours and we're like, it's just not worth it. Like having all these, and then it was causing friction between us, because what happened is the folks would unintentionally create drama triangles. And a drama triangle is where someone basically puts themselves or is put into a position of being a victim, and then they create a persecutor and then a hero, and they go to the hero. Normally it's someone who like doesn't necessarily agree with them, but is like empathetic, and they're like, oh, this thing happened. And then the hero goes to the persecutor, and the persecutor naturally has to like defend themselves and kind of defame the victim, because all of a sudden it's like you just create this triangle, and no one's right or wrong. It's just literally like a bad thing happened. Oh, this person was the impetus for the bad thing. Then that person has to be like, well, no, this is not like just drama, right? And so we were just like, it's not worth it. And we're like, let's actually, like, we didn't say like, let's actually defend the values, but we were just like, we just have to put it like the hardest of lines. If someone sucks at this, it doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means we're not for them. There's more companies and we'll suffer the consequences. And it turned out as soon as we turned that line and started like pre-screening folks, firing folks over it, et cetera, with healthy severance, all of a sudden, like everything got better. Everything felt better. We had problems in our business, but it was no longer with people, because people knew where they stood. They knew like what was valued. They knew what was like not, part of the culture. And everyone could kind of be aligned. And it took us like 5-6 years, but that was like the biggest success, is making those decisions. I think more tactically, I just don't know if we were that great at talent acquisition, to be honest. Like, I think we were good at like really going after junior. Like we got so lucky that we would find really hungry young talent, and we invested so much time in helping them grow and giving them feedback and all this. And they probably were going to be successful without us anyways, but that was kind of the advantage, that we got to take advantage of. They were going to be successful. And I don't even know if we were really good at identifying them, but we just had really good talent, and they started referring folks. And then I do think one thing we did is we finally got a really good recruiter that we paid market for. And she was just really, really good. Like we approached her as not, because all of our recruiters prior to that, they kind of did people stuff and recruiting and operations. This is someone we just hired to recruit, and we didn't expect anything else out of her. And she was just really good, and we paid her well for it. And, it was great. So I think that's another thing, was just like really just having someone focus on recruiting rather than trying to find that ops person who kind of does everything.
Yeah, I think that is a kind of smart choice, but still, I think many companies do that mistake, that there's basically one person in HR handling the operations, current people, recruitment, employer branding. And I think it's kind of saying that you would hire one person to handle your customer success, sales, and marketing. I think it just won't work in a good way.
Yeah, makes sense.
But then, fuck up. What was the biggest fuck up during the journey?
Yeah, so I think kind of the inverse of everything I said. So I think that like all the like kind of messing around with trying to be accommodating to people, and it was well intentioned. Like it was very well intentioned. Like we were trying to basically, we're trying to accommodate people. We wanted them to like us. We wanted them to like have a good journey at ProfitWell. But it wasn't us, it wasn't them. It was just misalignment. I think paying too far under market, like we were going to run into an issue where, we had people working for us for like 5 years, definitely under market. And obviously the last 2 years have been really aggressive. And so coming up closer to market was definitely going to be troublesome. And I think like we never, ever cracked the code beyond Peter, who led sales, and Facundo, who was our CPO, and then one of our VPs of engineering. We never cracked the code on director and above hiring. Like we always grew people to those levels, but we never cracked the code on it. And I think that was a big screw up, because I think we could have probably accelerated further if we had cracked that code earlier. I think it was classic like first time founder bullshit where we were like, well, the path of least resistance is to just do it or just figure out how to set the system up or figure out how to get 2 junior people to kind of run this thing and then like not really focus on the right things rather than going and either paying a recruiting firm or like actually properly going after and trying to find a VP. Because director on up recruiting, like finding the right people, it costs a lot to do it and it costs a lot to like bring them on. And I think we just weren't willing to do that. And I think that was a big mistake.
Interesting. But hey, then last question, and this is actually not from me, but a person you know. I did an episode together with Andrew David, CMO of Paddle, and I told to Andrew that we are doing this episode together, and I asked Andrew like, what should I be asking from Patrick? And Andrew said that I should ask that kind of now when you merge Paddle and ProfitWell. What would you do differently from people perspective?
I think that we ended up, I think we messed up like 3 things. I think one thing that we messed up was our exec team, like integrations are really hard for a lot of reasons. And I think one of the biggest people problems is trust. And I think what ended up happening is that I think our exec team, we didn't really consciously try to build the trust amongst the exec team. We were just kind of like, all right, let's just work on stuff and like do this and do that. And there were all these and none of it was ill intentioned, but there was like these conversations happening underneath the conversation. Like people are like, oh, this person said it this way. Well, did they mean it that way? Did they not? And it wasn't as dramatic as I'm making it sound, but like, I think what we should have done is had a facilitator come to us the first month, the 3rd month, and the 6th month and like do some sort of program to like help us talk about our childhoods or something to like get us to trust each other quicker. I think that would have saved a lot of frustration. I think the second thing is that we kind of went, okay, here's this acquisition happening. They don't have a product leader. We have a really good product leader. We didn't have a CMO. Andrew was there. Okay, we're just going to have Andrew take on the marketing team today, and we're just going to take on Facundo, take on the product team. Boom, boom, everything's done, right? Like everyone gets it, right? And I think that like we just weren't, it wasn't as bad as I'm saying, but we weren't as thoughtful as we could have been about bringing everyone together. Like we brought everyone into the one place. We did like a summit in the UK, but then like beyond that, it just kind of didn't, how do I put it? Like there could have been a lot more thoughtful of how you bring the teams together. Everything focused so much on combining the Slacks and getting email addresses, which obviously was really, really important. But I think we needed more conscious, like, how do we bring the teams actually together? Yeah, and that would have helped because we did lose some people who we probably shouldn't have lost. I don't know. It's so hard to say, but I think there's some people that would have probably stayed if we had been a little bit better at that. And then I think the third thing is there was some lack of role definition, including myself, that like just made it hard. Like it was like, where am I supposed to like attack? Where am I not? Oh, I start attacking this thing. Oh, I shouldn't have been doing that because that's someone else's thing. And so there was just a lot of that type of stuff that I think it made it really difficult. But it's hard, man. I don't know. Some of these things, this is my first like integration I've ever gone through, and everyone says they like are really hard, and I never understood it until why. I was like, well, the products, they work together, this mission, everything makes sense. Like, why isn't, it's because it's people. People are harder, not because they're inherently hard, but because, they're sometimes hard to, trust, to build trust and stuff. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where I'm just not sure if some of these things are avoidable, but I think we could have at least done better to be like, well, at least we did everything we could. And if there's obvious things we could have done differently, I think that's where it probably could have helped, but I won't know until the next one. So I'll let you know after the next one what that looks like.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you got a lot of good ideas about SaaS talent acquisition. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it on your social so others can hear it too. And if you have a topic in mind that you would like me to cover in this podcast, share it with me as well. I'm Samuli, CEO and co-founder in TalentBee, where we help fast-growing SaaS companies in their talent acquisition. Make sure to follow us, make sure to follow this podcast, and have an awesome week. Bye-bye.